About a year ago, I was living with my mate. I stayed in a ground floor flat that kind of sits in a cul-de-sac and is a bit of a pain to walk to, kind of detached from the community. The only times I felt completely secure are during sunlight, depending on the time of the year. The block of flats is kind of an L shape. Our entrance sits kind of inside that 90-degree angle. Inside the main building, there's a flat on either side and stairs in front. The immediate entrance hall is very dark. I feel like the lights choose when and when not to work. The flats are basic. A hallway, 2 small double bedrooms, a bathroom, a decent living room, and a small kitchen. The hallway is quite long and the living room is at the end of it. Both bedrooms face each other so we can talk from our doorways, if that makes sense. Telling you this because it'll help you picture the incident. It was about 11:30 at night and my flatmate was in her room, presumably asleep. She had a habit of leaving things unlocked and I have to make sure everything is locked up before I head off to sleep, but she'd gotten better and normally at least had the chain on the door if it wasn't locked. She always goes to bed early, so this wasn't weird. I was in the living room and decided to grab a pint of water before heading to bed myself. I went into the kitchen, which is attached to the living room, switching on the kitchen light and filling up a glass. The car park in front of the flat was very dark. I remember feeling kind of eerie. I'm not sure why, I just kind of felt like something was off. That kind of feeling you get when you switch the light off and run up the stairs. Anyway, I had a couple of sips and filled the glass a little bit more and headed to go out of the kitchen when the front doorbell went. I didn't even know we had a freaking doorbell. About 10 seconds passed before the letterbox was hit twice and my stomach sank. I felt trapped in the kitchen. Important to note 2 things. 1. If you step out of the kitchen, it puts you in perfect line with the hallway if the living room door is open, which it was. 2. Our front door had a bloody window so you could see the silhouettes of anyone outside or in. Us being girls, we had a cute gray curtain across it, but it was pretty see-through. I grabbed my phone and called my mate who was in her room. Right next to the front door, we both whispered. "Did you hear that?" Both thinking we'd misheard it, we had to whisper because the walls were like paper in that flat. You could always hear people coming and going. She came to her bedroom doorway but couldn't move forward because then she'd be in direct sight of the window. I edged my way out of the kitchen, keeping flat against the wall, eventually sinking to the floor, texting her now because we were both closer to the door and whoever would probably hear us. Another thing you should probably know is this person must have buzzed other flats to get in the building, but didn't buzz ours. So I reckon they saw me from the kitchen window. I'm a fairly ordinary looking 120-pound girl. Lying in a kind of army crawl, I saw the silhouette of a tall, broad, bald man. It could only have been a man. He clapped the letterbox again, but just stood there. Terrified, I mouthed to my mate, "Did you lock the door?" She said no. The chain wasn't on the door either. Now or never, I suppose. I crawled as low as I could to my bedroom, crawled to my desk, grabbed my keys, got to the door. It's only about a meter, and frantically shoved the keys in the lock and twisted, at the same time putting the chain on. This is a noisy affair. He obviously noticed I was there, hitting the letterbox again and trying the handle. As I desperately tried to twist the crap old school key in the lock, I got it. Terrified to stand up, my mate put her head out of her room to see if we were cool, and he wasn't there anymore. In a kind of half-stoned, half-asleep stupor, she reckoned on just going back to bed. Something nagged me though really badly. Remember how I said we could hear people coming and going really easily? It was eerily quiet and not once did either of us hear the building's main door open or close. This was someone in the building. We had one person across from us, 2 people above us, and 2 people above them. 2 of those flats are students. Our neighbor across the way was a 98-year-old woman. There was a couple and a sort of short, long-haired, chill guy. Nobody we knew matched the frame of the man in our flat window. I stayed up until I couldn't anymore, texting mates, jamming my room door shut, and keeping my hockey stick next to my bed. I realized about a month after this that the service button at the front of the main building was broken, and anybody could come in if they pressed it, and could be unheard coming in if they were very quiet, and knew they had to be careful with the door as it was old and heavy. I still think they saw me in the kitchen in the light, and thought to try their luck. This could have easily been a completely different story, so always lock your doors. Double lock, no matter how safe you reckon your area is. We have literally no idea to this day who that was or why, and we never heard anyone use the doorbell again. I used to work at an apartment complex. Larry was a resident who was a regular in the office. I'm using the term resident very loosely in this case, as Larry never actually had a lease at my complex. Larry effectively lived with an actual resident, a woman named Lydia, that had been living at the complex as long as I had worked there. When I had first started, it was a whole thing that no one in the office could easily communicate with her. She only spoke Portuguese, really, so she would get frustrated and become difficult to work with when we needed to post notices, put in work orders, and all that. Note, the maintenance man spoke Spanish, so he could communicate with her better than us, but he wasn't always available to act as a translator. Her small grandson also lived with her. He was on the spectrum, and we regularly witnessed her struggling to handle him. I'm not exactly sure how Lydia met Larry, but suddenly he was there one day and never left. Everything changed for the better when Larry arrived, though. Even though he never learned Portuguese and Lydia never learned English, they got along great and communicated fairly well through gestures. He would help her with putting in work orders and would somehow explain paperwork to her. Every day he was out in the pool with her grandson, working on social skills with him. The grandson grew so much in that period of time. If we were doing anything at that complex, like prepping for a storm or planning a complex event, he would always help us with moving large furniture and cleaning up. If he ever witnessed anyone being mean to us in the office, he would jump to our defense immediately, and he was always so polite and friendly. Everyone knew and loved him. The last time I saw Larry started out like any of his usual visits. He came into the office to drop off Lydia's rent and hung around briefly to chat and catch up. We just reopened after the holidays. He was very excited and said he had great news and asked for a hug. Immediately, that made me a bit uncomfortable. Asking for hugs was a thing a lot of creepy old men would do, but Larry had never behaved inappropriately towards me before. I chalked it up to him viewing our relationship as a friendly one and gave him a polite hug. Larry was a big guy, and he gave me a crushing hug that lingered about a second too long. He then told me the great news. He was getting reinstated at his job. I knew Larry had previously worked as a security officer or cop. He'd mentioned it a handful of times, but he'd had a heart attack on the job and gone on to a long-term disability. Occasionally, when you'd see him out swimming or walking in the complex, he would mention he was working to get approved to go back to work, but there was no mistaking Larry for a man in good health or good shape, and I never anticipated he'd achieve his goal. I congratulated him on getting his job back. All smiles. He then whispered, "Can I tell you a secret?" Okay. I work for the FBI. I do undercover investigations on bad men and put them away. He pulled out his wallet and flashed a badge very quickly. I follow them around and dig dirt on them. Then once I have enough, jump on it and arrest them. If I have to, I put them down. They even gave me my gun back. He pulled up his shirt, revealing a pistol concealed at his waist. As soon as he showed me his gun, a horrible feeling washed over me. Showing somebody your concealed gun is just not something you normally do. Something about his demeanor was completely different from all of our previous interactions. He was weirdly giddy, almost like he was high. He rambled on a bit more about his job, and I nodded along, not saying anything so that I wouldn't accidentally prolong the conversation. Finally, Larry got up to leave, but then jerked to a stop in the doorway and came back in. "Oh, I almost forgot my hug." I forced a laugh and jokingly said, "Oh, no, you didn't. Remember, you got your hug when you came in." No, I don't remember that, so give me one." If you've never been in a situation like this, it's hard to explain how stuck between a rock and a hard place you feel. On the one hand, you don't want to make any physical contact with this person, but there's also the fear of what will happen if you refuse them and the wanting to defuse the situation. I gave Larry the hug, and he lingered longer this time. Then he said he'd see me tomorrow and left. After he was gone, I immediately documented the occurrence and notified my coworker and boss. The maintenance man said Larry had also shown him the badge and gun, and that he thought it was BS he was working for the FBI. Essentially, my boss's verdict was to wait and see if anything weird happened again, hoping it was just a one-time thing and that Larry would return to his usual self. Thankfully, it was a non-issue as he suddenly disappeared as quickly as he'd first shown up. The next time the maintenance man did work in Lydia's apartment, he asked about Larry, and she said she'd caught him stealing money out of her purse and had kicked him out. I will probably never know what happened to make Larry suddenly change like that. Maybe he was taking drugs or had a brain tumor, or maybe he was just a predator that had finally let his nice old man mask slip after years of successfully faking it. I don't believe I was in imminent danger that day or anything really, but Larry never overtly threatened me or was nasty and mean, but the situation probably would have gotten bad if Lydia hadn't kicked him out. Back in 2004, I was getting tired of paying rent and decided that I wanted to buy a small place for myself. Finances were tight and I couldn't afford to do it on my own, but my dad, being a real estate developer and investor, made a deal with me. He would help me with the down payment. I would pay the mortgage, and in 2 to 3 years when we sold it, we would split the profit. My dad had a great eye for house potential, and being a second-generation builder in the area, everybody knew him, and brokers would often show him off-market houses, ones that were going up for sale to the public soon, but were taking offers now. Our day started out simple enough. Go to a few open houses and see what was available. My dad's favorite broker was accompanying us that day, and they had a list of potentials for our viewing, starting with a house in a town called Terra Linda. We pulled up to the house and it was cute. Small and old like every house in the neighborhood, but it clearly had good bones and was a really, really good price. This was the kind of house my dad loved and would have been an easy flip, so we went inside. Immediately a smell, an almost sweet rotting smell filled our noses. When I say filled our noses, I actually sort of mean punched us in the face. My dad leant over to me in his always calm manner and said, "Don't worry, we can replace the carpets and paint the walls. That will fix the smell." "Okay, great, Dad, but there is no carpet." That is when we looked down and noticed that the floor of this house was bare concrete. The owners had the carpets removed. Our broker told us as she shrugged. "Okay, that's odd, but let's keep looking." We walked through the living room, a wonderful space, no doubt. But why are there huge holes cut into the sheetrock? Large 3-foot diameter holes, and not just one, but several. Shrugs all around. We toured the bathrooms, all 3 of them, and each toilet was filled with different varieties of fruit. One filled with oranges, one had apples, and the last I believe is grapefruits. What is this house? We left, and I expressed my confusion to my dad, who again calmly said, "Yeah, it's kind of a dump, but I can have a crew in here and have all of that fixed and looking great in 2 weeks." Seemed fair enough. We leave, actually excited about that property, and decide to go to the next one. Our broker walks us inside and exchanges pleasantries with the broker who is showing that specific house. They are talking and she mentions showing us the house on Hibiscus, and he says, "Oh, the dead lady house." Our broker nods, and that was the end. Wait, what? We look at the second house and I ask the broker about the dead woman's house. She says, "Oh, the owner of that house was an old woman who recently passed away, and she lived with her son there." And that was sort of it. My dad noticed my uneasiness with that answer. "Houses don't have feelings," he said, "and everybody has to die somewhere." My dad had bought plenty of houses where people had died and several where murders had taken place. It didn't affect him one bit. He looked at houses as wood and paint, not energy and feelings. I told him it didn't bother me, but inside it really did. We looked at a few more houses that day, and at the end, my dad and I decided to put an offer on the Terra Linda house. It really was a great deal, and as my dad said, everyone dies somewhere. I'll burn some sage or whatever, and that will be that. I'll admit that a little bit of greed took over as well. The house was well under market in a nice area. In 2 years, I could make enough to put down a down payment on a new place and not need my dad's help anymore. That was appealing. We placed an offer and went home. That night, I couldn't shake the uneasiness of the dead lady comment. I went to the webpage of my local newspaper and searched the archive. I entered the address and the first story that pops up, titled, "Woman Dead in the House for 6 months with Handicapped Son." This isn't just a dead lady's house. Turns out this lady had a son who got into college in the mid-70s and, in turn, did a lot of drugs. So much that he quite literally fried himself. Not so far as becoming a vegetable, but unable to really care for himself, so he moved in with his mom, and 30 plus years later when she passed away, he didn't know what to do, so he just did nothing. Over the weeks and months since his mother's passing, and being unable to pay the bills, slowly the utilities and garbage stopped, and the smell coming from the house, not to mention nobody seeing the old lady who lived there, caused a concerned neighbor to request a wellness check from the police. Hundreds of pounds of trash and maggots in the walls was quoted by an interviewed officer. 1 week later, we were putting an offer in. I called my dad and read him the article. He was admittedly shocked and told me about his business partner, Bob, who lives in a murder house, so don't worry about it. But I kept worrying. The next day I woke up and the worry had not subsided. I reread the article. I noticed there was no mention of the son. The article said he was taken to a hospital and examined, then let go. But let go where? This is the only home this guy knew. Was he going to find his way back? Instantly, I had visions of watching movies in the living room during a storm, and as the lightning strikes, I see him pulling out the window, yelling, "Mother," at me. I call the hospital and ask about the son. Of course, they can't give me any information, but I explain that I'm considering buying the house, and I am worried that he might show back up. The woman's only reply was, "Well, all I can say is that it's a chance you are going to have to take it if you buy it." That was it. I called my dad back and had him remove the offer. No way. Done. A few years later, I drove by the house. It was being fully gutted. I have no idea if the son ever came home. I do know that the new owners made a killing on it when they sold it, but I didn't care. The fewer old lady ghosts and crazy roaming sons in my life, the better. When I finished university, I moved back home until I found a job. As soon as I could afford to, I set up a profile on the website Spare Room. I was contacted by James, who had a room to rent on the outskirts of the town I worked in. It sounded good, but he wanted to talk on the phone before inviting me to view it. We had a chat one evening, and it turned out that we had some things in common. We both enjoyed fitness, particularly swimming, and were movie buffs. By the end of the call, it had felt like chatting to an old friend, and I was looking forward to meeting him. James didn't specify his age, but I assumed he was in his 20s like me. When I went to view the property, he actually came out of the house next door to greet me. When he introduced himself as James, I was pretty shocked. He was at least 50, dressed quite conservatively, and looked like he was wearing a hairpiece. If he told me on the phone that he was in his early 20s, I wouldn't have questioned it. I went ahead with the viewing, but I'd already decided I didn't want to rent a room from him. I wanted to live with people who were a similar age to me. I was also put off by the house decor, which looked like it hadn't changed since the 80s. When I viewed the bedroom, it looked like it was occupied by a young person. There were several pairs of trainers and a games console. James said that the previous tenant, Mark, was moving to London for work. Coincidentally, my name is Mark too. James invited me to sit in the living room after the house tour. I didn't want to be rude, so I did. He explained that he cared for his elderly mother who lived next door. Then he started complimenting my style, saying I looked cool. He proceeded to put his hand on my leg, which made me feel very uncomfortable. When he asked if I was interested in the room, I said I had some other properties to view, but would be in touch. I then made my excuses to leave. Everything about him screamed red flag. I just wanted to get out of that house. As soon as I was back in my car, I called my mom to tell her how freaked out I was, and I absolutely would not be living there. James texted me a few days later to ask if I thought any more about moving in. I lied and said I'd found somewhere closer to town. I did eventually find something with some other young professionals, which turned out to be great. Some months later, our town was shocked by the news that a man's body had been found in the fields on the outskirts. He was later identified as Mark. I didn't think much of that until I saw a murder suspect was his landlord, James, the same James whose house I viewed. I saw him on the news and got instant chills. He was later convicted of Mark's murder. Background. I, 24 female, live with my roommate, 23 female, in an apartment in the suburbs of Atlanta. As you may know, Atlanta is super dangerous in parts and crime-ridden right now, so we have a Ring peephole camera, which is perfect for apartments, and a digital lock on our front door for safety. About 3 months ago, the sweet family from across the hall moved out, and we got a new neighbor. His name is David, and let's just say he's interesting. When we first saw him moving in, we were a bit taken aback by the sheer amount of stuff he was trying to fit in his one-bedroom apartment. All of it was anime merch and Star Wars memorabilia. Definitely gives me hoarder vibes, but not my business. When the moving trucks left and a few days had passed, my roommate and I knocked on his door to give him a welcome to the neighborhood gift basket with some baked goods, dog treats and poop bags for his dog, and seasonal candles. Apparently, this was not the correct thing to do. After that day, David got creepy. It started out fairly innocent enough. He would come to the door whenever he heard me or my roommate coming or going to have a quick chat, or he would come over regularly to ask for salt or sugar, or things like toilet paper. Sometimes, he would even ask if we could come over and watch his dog, but within the past 2 weeks, things have really escalated. 2 weekends ago, we were out pretty late partying at the bars near the Braves Stadium. We ended up getting home around 3 a.m. only to find David sitting at the top of the stairs waiting for us. He acted all upset and asked us where we had been, and requested that we tell him if we were planning to be out past midnight. I laughed in his face and he called me a mindless Stacy. Still not sure what that means. He also asked for access to our Ring camera so he could make sure we are safe. We laughed at him again and went to our apartment. But here's the scary part. We checked the Ring camera the next morning, and he sat outside his apartment staring at our door for the rest of the night. When we saw that, we contacted the complex to let them know that he was acting crazy. They told us to contact the police, so we did. The police told us to contact them if he made any threats, but since we lived in a shared place, they couldn't do much until he entered our apartment or threatened us. I assume the complex said something to him because he left us alone for the next 5 days or so. This week, he is out of control. He is constantly sitting outside of our apartment. My roommate has started leaving for work an hour earlier so that she doesn't cross paths with him. I cannot leave the apartment during the day because he is constantly waiting outside for me. He has asked me out, left love letters on our door, on our cars, and in our mailbox. I told him once that I wasn't interested, and he told me that he would freak out if I didn't go on a date with him. Of course, I don't have that in writing, so the police won't do shit. He also put up a Ring doorbell of his own so he can track all of our movements and will leave really creepy sexual notes when we're gone, so we find them when we come back. What do we do? Edit. Thank you for all the advice. For now, my brother is spending the night on my couch for the next few nights until we can have a sit-down meeting with my landlord. We have collected all the evidence and Ring footage so we can show how much this has progressed. I'm sure the landlord and the police think we're being dramatic little girls or whatever, so we're not going to take no for an answer. Either he leaves or we break our lease and we get our full security deposit back. We're also going to file for a temporary restraining order at the very minimum because some of the commenters said that would be faster than going to the police. Again, thank you all for the advice. I'll update you if any shit goes down. Another update. Thank you to everyone who replied in this thread and sent me PMs. I really appreciate all the kind words, advice, and support. 1. We met with our landlord last week. Unfortunately, they aren't willing to work with us as much as we expected. They will not remove him from his unit. Since we didn't want to spend a ton of money to move, we asked if we could move units within the complex. The landlord offered us a 1-bedroom unit on the terrace level, so my roommate and I would have to share a room in what is basically the basement of our building. Not ideal. We spoke to the police and they said that the notes and letters weren't enough to get someone on stalking or harassment, especially since he lives literally 3 feet away from us. Probably just thinks you're cute, they said. They did keep the Ring videos and said they would contact us sometime this week after they reviewed all of the footage. We both have moved in with my parents for the time being. Shout out to them for being incredible parents. It really sucks spending $2,000 monthly on a place that you can't live. We are actively looking for other apartments, but money is tight, since we would have to buy out the current lease and pay to start a new one. Also not ideal. So maybe not the update we're hoping for, but we are both safe right now, and that's what's most important. If anyone has suggestions about raising $5,000 in a month, please let me know. Over a year ago, I moved into this property. The front yard had visibly been dug up recently. It looks like crap. The front of the property had been hard to maintain. Grass not growing back properly, sunken ground, rocks, housing bricks halfway out of the soil, etc. The owner of the property I rent the house from claims to have no knowledge about who or why the front yard was dug up. The neighbors have mentioned seeing people before I moved in digging up the property with some sort of digger. Anyway, just the other day, I was sitting in the lounge watching YouTube videos, and for about an hour, I had that feeling I was being watched. Eventually, and reluctantly, I decided to go to the door to have a look. Of course, before I got there, I heard, "Hello," come from outside. I opened the door to find this man I've never seen before, blurting out information that only the owner, I, and a few people would know of. He knew the house was being sold in March, which was originally true, but it wasn't until a later date now. He assumed I was the owner and asked me if I could dig up the front yard. He was quite persistent on wanting to do so basically right now. All I managed to say was no, but I can ask the owner if you want. Meanwhile, I was thinking, what the heck? He stated he was previously there and dug up the yard. The rest of the conversation was awkward and basically went in my ear and out the other while I was trying to process what was going on, connecting the dots. Eventually, he walked away and down the street. I went to the lounge again and stood looking out the window, which looked out over the front of the property, directly to the road, and I saw him slowly drive past. He looked into the property once more before seeing me at the window and quickly threw up his hand in a waving motion. I don't know what to think of this encounter, to be honest, but it creeped me out, and I don't really want to find out what's in the front yard. I will be contacting both of my neighbors and the homeowner in relation to this incident, as well as police. I'm not sure if I should have a little dig around in the property or not, but if I do, it will be this weekend. I didn't ask why he wanted to, which I know is completely stupid, but if there was something nefarious, I suppose I didn't want to cause any conflict at the time of this encounter, as it was only me at home at the time. Update. I dug up the property on the weekend. The soil is rather solid. All I found were glass bottles and rocks resembling obsidian throughout all of the soil, but I think it is only coal. The guy hasn't come around again, and I haven't seen anything suspicious yet. I did some research on the area, and the land was bought in the 1920s by the council for housing development. Prior to the 1920s, the area I live in was a dumping ground, for all manner of things, but why my front yard out of everyone around the area? I never saw him go and ask anywhere else. Hi, I'm 22 female from Hawaii and live on the more countryside of my islands where not even Google Maps can tell you exactly where I live. To put it simply, I live in the boonies and people who don't live by me don't come into my neighborhood unless they are lost. I'm only saying this for context for you. About 3 days ago, I was in my driveway on my way to catch the bus to work until a weird catering truck came towards my house and pulled into my driveway. A middle-aged guy came out wearing a tacky aloha shirt only tourists would be seen wearing, and dirty khaki shorts with run-down sandals. He looked dirty to say the least. Looked like he hadn't scrubbed in days. He asked me if I wanted to buy meat or seafood, and I said no thanks, and then asked if anyone was home. I lied and said my uncle, hoping he would go away. These kinds of trucks don't come anywhere on my side of the island, by the way. But he didn't. Then proceeded to compliment my looks, saying how I have nice hair, then going on about how beautiful island girls are, and how our curves are. Great, it's creepy stuff. It wasn't until my neighbor came outside that he drove away. Yet once I turned the corner, there he was. Then he slowly drove behind me. I felt sketched out to say the least and called my mom, who's a dispatcher, and told her what happened and how he looked. She told me that she would handle it. By that time, more people started coming out of their houses and he left. 2 hours later, I was at work and she told me that she got a couple other calls about the same guy with the exact description as me. And I was asked to go to the station to say if I recognized anyone, and I pointed at his picture. They confirmed that he is a well-known sex trafficker that they hadn't been able to track for weeks. Since then, I've locked my house as soon as my mom leaves for work. I haven't really slept since and have been throwing up or having panic attacks anytime I leave time for myself to think. I'm scared shitless and I don't know what to do. He knows where I work, my house, and my face, and it scares me to the point that I've even covered up my windows just in case somebody might try to look inside. The earlier post about a scary experience in a sex shop reminded me about my own experience a decade ago. I had just moved to New York and I hadn't really gotten my sea legs. I was a stereotypical Midwesterner who was just discovering the city and her sexuality, and I wanted to buy a toy or two to kill some time at home. This was a long time ago, but I remember it being dark outside when this story took place. Most of my creepy New York experiences take place after dark. Go figure. There are or were several great sex shops in the city pre-pandemic, but there are still many seedy places around, especially on the west side near Times Square or Penn Station. I'd always been curious about those stores, so I decided to go in on a whim. The shop was blue with white tile and filthy. There was dust on the ancient-looking dildos and faded porn DVDs, and the harsh industrial lighting made everything look even grosser and more depressing. I was neither impressed nor interested in anything there, but the 3 other men in the store seemed very interested in me. One guy, who I guessed was the manager, smiled at me and offered a discount as soon as the other worker left the room. I was young, broke, and stupid, so I thought this was because he didn't get women in often and wanted to impress me. He said there was something he wanted to show me in the back, and I followed him, thinking maybe he had newer, better products back there. Instead, he took me to a set of booths in the back, sat me down in a dark little booth with a blue door and a big TV screen, and turned on some porn. I was concerned, but his English wasn't very good, so I thought maybe he was trying to get me to pay to watch it. I figured I'd just tell him I wasn't interested, but then he stepped inside and closed the door. My alarm bells, which I had ignored up to that point. I have anxiety, so I'm always sort of alarmed, and started blaring at full volume. But I've had a habit of freezing. In stressful situations, I have an even worse habit of gaslighting myself into thinking everything's fine, so I just sat there trying to pretend that he had good intentions. Then he stood behind me and started feeling his way down my chest, and I couldn't pretend anymore. It felt like forever, but my flight senses finally kicked in, and I jumped up and leapt for the door. There was a terrifying moment when I pushed against it, thinking he'd lock me in, but I was so scared I'd actually turned the doorknob the wrong way. Finally, I slammed the door open and ran out of the store. I remember the other employee looking at me, confused as I passed him. The next day, I had a panic attack at work and almost got fired for taking an unnecessary break to go cry in the back. But that's another story for another time, so I'll leave it there. That was not, sadly, my only creepy sex store experience, but it was the worst. I've since learned to stick to nice little boutiques staffed by women and queer folks. Or, online. I love my job because it gives me so many instances where shit that only gets seen in movies is real. It's gotten to the point where I feel like I'm not safe in public without one of my husband's knives on my person after this. A common phrase I've heard all this month is, "Wow, you were a girl. You normally don't see women working in places like this." I wonder why. Let me clarify. I used to be one of those who wear nice work clothes to work. Shorts, tank tops, etc. However, working in a place like this, you have to be careful of who you are nice to because people take it the wrong way. It's my job to be friendly and help, but some people take it completely out of context. I had a guy come in the other night around 10 or 11 talking to himself saying, "Wow, it's one of those places. I've never been in here. Since I work here, I try and say hello and see if he needs help, but he doesn't make eye contact with me at all. Proceeds to walk to the opposite side of the platform and say that exact same thing over again to my best friend, who was just keeping me company at work that day, and stare at her intensely while walking around. This guy was super tall and thin, and had a really bad few tan lines and was older. I got a weird vibe off of him when he came into the door, and it just got worse as he stayed in my store. He started walking down aisles talking to himself again and then making a huge circle in the store, avoiding eye contact with me. And when my friends and I started talking, he asked, "Can one of us come to the back area of the store where the lubricant is, which is under cameras but is a tight area regardless?" Because my creep radar was going off, I said, "I can help you up here so I can help the other group as well." He then started acting weird when another group of guys came into the store and talking to himself again. The guys could see my face go from super happy to unnerved because of the creepy dude walking around. My friend finally was able to get the other two guys to catch what was happening as the creepy dude dumped his change onto the counter to pay for a sample of lube and said, "I don't know what samples cost money. I might have to come back." Really creepily. He then got his change and started outside, where one of the guys who just came in followed behind to make sure he left. He was talking to our outside camera in his roof. I was so glad he left after creeping me out for almost an hour. Flash forward to the following day, where I'm off for 4 days due to moving to a new place for work. And my boss calls. He says there was a tall, older dude coming into the store looking for the girl that works here with a purse of some kind. He was instantly creeped out and told him to leave and not come back. He wasn't sure why he was looking for me, as I didn't tell him about the other night. So this happened in my very first relationship. I was almost 21 at the time when I met my ex. I had never been kissed before and never even been on a date. But somehow I got myself into a relationship with this guy that helped me with studying for one of my tests a few years ago. Looking back, the relationship itself was also full of major red flags. I don't want to go into detail because that's not the point of this story, but essentially he sometimes told me, "I wish I could assault you." Bear in mind that he first told me that a few days after I had my first time with him. He was always laughing and smiling creepily when women in movies were beaten up, murdered, or assaulted. When he saw such scenes, he always smiled creepily and told me, "This is a nice scene," etc. He told me he liked the look of beaten up women. I had the biggest pink colored glasses on and thought these things were jokes. One evening when I met him, he asked if we could meet a friend of his. I told him, of course, because I had never met any of his friends before. So we drove to his friend's flat. Everything was good. When I was there, they immediately got their shisha, some kind of water smoking device, no drugs included, and lots of alcohol ready. My ex knew that I never drank, but he begged me to do it. This one time for him, so I did. It was this kind of extremely sweet strawberry tasting alcohol in an extremely huge bottle. We sat and talked, smoked the shisha, and drank. Well, I drank. Recalling the night, my ex and his best friend had only had one drink. But once my glass was empty, they immediately put more liquor in it and told me to drink more. I don't know why, but I did. At that time, I didn't really think about them still being on their first drink while I'd already finished my third or fourth, maybe even fifth. I was getting drunk and also feeling extremely unwell. The friend of my ex told me to take off my hoodie, which I did. Thankfully, I had a top underneath, and once I did, he complimented me on my bomb-ass body, and said I should have come here dressed like that. He touched me by the neck and shoulders and tried to flirt with me while my ex was right there, still always giving me more and more liquor. I tried to get away from him, but he got closer again and tried to play with my hair. I was pretty uncomfortable, but already so drunk that I couldn't tell him to piss off. Then my ex and the friend got up and were talking about something in the corner of the room. My ex came back to me, and for about 30 minutes, the friend of my ex was nowhere to be seen. My ex began making out with my drunk self, and he tried to undress me, but I denied it, telling him that I was on my period, which was true. Once I told him that, I could see that he was upset and almost slightly angry. He got up and got his friend, talking to him again, but this time I could see that the two of them were looking frustrated. I know that almost immediately after my ex and I went to my ex's flat, because we were told to go. After that, I can only remember the morning. My ex told me jokingly that I had passed out right before bed. I had the worst headache I'd ever experienced. I had my ex go and give me a bucket because my stomach turned and I puked so badly. I called my mom to pick me up. While waiting, my ex told me, sitting on the bed, that his friend would want to bang me so badly, and again, you know that I have the fantasy of assaulting you. Then my mom picked me up. When I was home, I shortly passed out in the bathroom, but after that I recovered. My ex mentioned the things about his friend wanting to bang me a few times after that, and asked me right after if he could give him my number. A few months after our breakup, his friend sent me a message on Facebook saying that he wanted to meet me. Looking back, I'm pretty sure that those two wanted to get me so drunk that I had no more control, and do you know what? The only thing that got into their way was my period. Such a creepy evening, and all the things that happened with my ex after that let me believe that. For example, recall a time there was a news in our country about a very drunk girl being assaulted by two men, and he always said, she was drunk, they did nothing wrong. Or like she wanted it. It's just sad that my rose-colored glasses didn't let me see that when we were still together. I should have run away immediately after he told me about his first fantasy. But on a happy note, I now have a boyfriend that treats me like I'm the most wonderful person on earth. This happened years ago. I think I was about 16. Back then, 16-year-olds could buy alcohol and cigarettes in the Netherlands, where I am from. It was a Friday night, and I was on my way to a friend's house, cycling as we do in the Netherlands. I took a detour as I wanted to buy a few beers, snacks, and cigarettes at the local supermarket. As I walk into the supermarket, a man, I think 50 years old, walks out. As we walk past each other, he looks at me and says, "Wow." I think nothing of it. Do the shopping, pay, and walk out. I don't know what the exact word is in English for those bins where you put old clothes in. The clothes are sent to Goodwill or poor countries, but the same guy from before was standing behind that bin. He was sitting on his bike looking at me. It was getting dark, streets were deserted, and I still had a 10-minute cycle ahead of me. I got this bad feeling about it, so I unlocked my bike and started cycling. This is when that bad feeling proved to be justified. As soon as I started cycling, that man started cycling as well. He catches up with me, and the conversation goes as follows. Man: "Hi, where are you going?" Me: "I'm going to hang out at a friend's house." Where does he live?" Trying to make him feel like I'm almost there. Just a minute from here." "Can I accompany you there?" "No thanks, I'm good." As I said that, he grabs my bicycle handles and pulls me closer. I almost fall over, regain my balance, and kick his bike. I start cycling as fast as I can, and he does as well, yelling at me. I arrive at my friend's house after what feels like forever. Unfortunately, my friend lives in a flat, so I have to ring the doorbell so he can buzz open the door. As I am ringing the doorbell frantically, the man just stands a few meters behind me waiting. I hear my friend asking, "Who's there?" over the intercom. I scream and cry, telling him to let me in, and he does. Luckily, my friends are all very big, scary-looking guys. They heard the panic in my voice, and as they see me as their younger sister, came down with chairs, ashtrays, and other makeshift weapons. Unfortunately, the guy had already left. I didn't want my friends to hurt him, just to scare him. I am 8 years older now, but I am still scared I'll meet another person like that man. So this happened less than 30 minutes ago, and I immediately thought of the subreddit and wanted to see what you guys thought. I am a single female living alone on the 3rd floor of a row home in Philadelphia. The house has been modified into 3 separate apartment units, and I am on the top floor. I rent through a property management group, and a few days ago, they let me know that they'd be sending someone out to repitch my window AC unit, as it had been leaking and water was getting in through the window downstairs. Old building, more their problem than mine. Cool, no problem. They send out a guy whom I assume they have contracted but is not necessarily a part of the property management group. He comes in, makes some light small talk with me about my 2 cats, and gets to work. Nothing out of the ordinary. He finishes in about 15 minutes and lets me know he is done and leaves my unit. About 2 minutes later, I hear him knock on my door again. I usher for him to come in and he proceeds to ask me if I have an extra key for the main door downstairs. I tell him that my neighbors, whom I am close friends with, have my only extra copy and that I only have one in my possession. He then proceeds to ask about nearby Home Depots and the like, questioning as to the closest place he can get a key copied. I ask him straight up if he is implying that I give him my key so that he can go make a copy, and he says yes, that the property management group asked him to ask me about it while he was there because they lost theirs. I politely told him that was not going to happen and suggested that he take it up with them if that's the case. I then called my property management company to confirm this information with them and report the incident just in case. They never answered the phone, so I ended up leaving a voicemail and a plan to follow up with an email as well. Small detail to add. I could have sworn I heard him messing with one of the doors downstairs after he left my unit the second time. The key to the main building is obviously different than the keys to get into each one of our individual units, so having a key to the main door is only the first step, but being that both I and the unit below me are single females living alone, I don't like this one bit. This is weird, right? Or am I bugging out? Update. My property management group answered the second time I called. My guess is that I was speaking to one of the leasing agents. She was pretty useless and sounded unbothered when I told her the story and basically said she would follow up with a contractor, but that she didn't really know anything about the service order because this was not a property she personally managed. I plan to give the other tenants a heads up. In his defense, he did not give me any weird vibes prior to, and even in his request, he sounded innocuous enough. However, and I don't know which door he was messing with, downstairs or main, he was messing with one. I thought about popping out to ask him what he was doing, but instead I opted to call my neighbor friend and loudly explain to her the situation that had just occurred, making sure to emphasize that I thought it was weird and that I was calling the property management company to fact check. The walls in this place are thin. If I could hear him, he could definitely still hear me. Shortly after my son was born, I moved into a new house with my girlfriend. I felt really lucky as we found an actual house for rent that was cheaper than any apartment we came across, and it was in the school district that we wanted. The house was quite isolated from the neighbors. The front of the house was abnormally far from the street, and the backyard was surrounded by a dense tree line. At nighttime, it looked as if we were surrounded by nothing but darkness. It wasn't really long when I started feeling unnerved, like somebody was watching me. This feeling almost always came from one window in particular, the window above the sink where we also had the air conditioning unit. It was the only window in the house where it would fit and reach an outlet. I brushed it off and did my best to ignore these feelings because I didn't want to freak out my girlfriend. I knew if I put the idea in her head, she'd never stop stressing, as she was diagnosed with anxiety. One night, I was on the couch with my girlfriend laughing and talking when I got that feeling again. I noticed my girlfriend got silent suddenly and was staring at the very window that made me feel uneasy. So I asked her how she was feeling. She told me that sometimes she feels like someone is watching her from that window but didn't want to mention it because she was afraid that I would think she was being crazy. Things got worse from here. I started hearing the dividers on the AC unit open when we were in bed at night. We'd hear pebbles and coins being thrown into our kitchen. I'd hear twigs snap outside at night, and I'd hurry and grab a flashlight and shine it outside of the window. I was actually hoping I'd see someone at this point, because the unknown element was driving me crazy. Every night, I was terrified I'd come home from work to my family being murdered. I'm still hanging on to the idea that I'm just imagining this stuff, but it was all confirmed one morning when I went out to the back to smoke a cigarette, and all of a sudden I caught something out of the corner of my eye, and all the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Goosebumps over my whole entire body before I could even realize what I was looking at. On the screen to my bedroom window, someone had written, "Coming," but backwards as if they wanted us to read it from the inside. What made this even scarier was the window was open and I slept right next to it. Basically, you could reach in and stab me in the back without even having to stand on anything. I started to keep all of the windows shut and locked. I even stacked empty soda cans in front of them so if somebody did manage to open a window, they'd make a ton of noise coming in. One night, I got home from work at my usual time, about 1 a.m. or so. We were going out of state for a couple of weeks the next morning, so I really wanted to just get home and go to sleep. I shower and we get all the lights off and we make our way to the bed. Almost immediately, we hear the divider on the AC open up and the pebble comes bouncing through the kitchen. I snapped. I got up and screamed, "I'm sick of this BS. I'm gonna kill you." I get dressed, hand my cell phone to my girlfriend, and tell her to lock the door behind me, but to call 911 if I yell, and to not open the door unless she's certain that it's me. I get outside and I'm just listening for movement. It probably took me a few minutes to get dressed and get outside. Finally, about 20 seconds later, I hear a car door slam on the street directly behind us through the tree line. I hear its tires squeal as it peels out, and I can hear it driving really fast through our neighborhood. I'm hyper aware at this point, and I can tell the streets it's taking, as I've been in this neighborhood my whole life. I hear it turn onto the main street and realize it's got to pass my street next. But it don't pass my street. It turns down. It drives really fast past my house, and all I could think to do is point at it, looking as aggressive as possible. I went to sleep. We all went on vacation for a couple of weeks the next morning, and neither one of us ever got that feeling again. We never even heard a single noise out of the ordinary again. But the next time I moved, I made sure to buy a house with a window high off the ground. This just happened a few hours ago. My house is on the very edge of town, right before a large wooded area. We do have neighbors. There are 6 apartments in total and some across the street, but it was around 11 p.m. and at that time, most of them are usually asleep or sitting in the front of their TV, or both. I went out to take my dog on a walk and noticed a bike leaning against the wall in the driveway. It seemed odd since there's a bike rack behind the house, but I didn't really think much of it and went on. When I came back, the bike was still there. Now, there are walls on both sides of the driveway, about 5 feet tall at the highest point right behind the gate. So, I looked up the wall to my left, right into the cold dead stare of a woman crouching on the wall. Scared as heck, I just kind of stared back for a second. I'd never seen this woman before. She didn't move whatsoever. My dog seemed also rather confused and scared. I kept walking to the door but never took my eyes off her. Once we were past her, she jumped off the wall and started following us. At that point, my dog, a pretty big Doberman mix, began barking and growling, and that luckily stopped her from coming any closer. I got in the house, locked the door behind me, and am once again glad that I had this dog with me. I don't know who she was or what she was up to, but the scariest part is that she probably already stood there when I went out. So, creepy lady in my driveway, I hope you have left and please don't ever come back. A lot of people suggested calling a non-emergency number. I've called there a few times before, because of vandalism and trespassing on some abandoned buildings next to our house. And frankly, they don't give a crap. I doubt they would have even done anything. Plus, because it was very dark, the description I could have given of the woman would be very vague. There's a happy ending to this story. I'm 6'8" and a bodybuilder. I have a buzz cut and at least 30 tattoos all over my body. Plot twist. I'm a lesbian. This wasn't really my problem, but I stuck my nose in because I'm not a heartless asshole. People who know me always say the first thing they thought about me when they met me was, "Dang, she's scary." But my nickname is Gigi, for short, gentle giant. That's my background for this. This was happening to a girl when I was at the store. I was at Target and was there to grab some mac and cheese and leave. I walked down the aisle and saw a girl backed against the shelf by a man. He was wearing a huge gray coat, which was weird as heck because it was like 90 degrees out that day. I was wearing a tank top and some shorts, while the girl was wearing a dress, so I don't know what the guy's problem was. She shot me a look of surprise and alertness, then looked back at the guy quickly. I have bad hearing and almost deaf in one ear, so I couldn't hear what the man was talking about. I started walking forward and caught the end of what he was saying. The guy, we're going to call him Max. The cute girl is going to be Jessie. The red one is yours, right? I'll meet you there and we can go back to my place. That sounds fun, doll, Max asked. His voice made me wish I were actually deaf. Hey, sorry I took so long. I had to help some lady out. Who's your new friend here? I asked when I got to them. Jesse let out a sigh of relief when he turned my way. He looked up at me in confusion, then looked back to her. Who's this doll? He asked, looking back to her. I'm her girlfriend. What do you want? I asked cautiously. Doll and I are going back to my place, he said and smiled creepily at her. No, we're heading back home right now. Come on, let's go. We're not going back to this Target. It has a Walmart problem. I said, and watched as she nodded frantically while speed walking over to me. Come on, doll. Are you really going to go with this chick? I'll show you the right side. But I can change your mind even. He yelled loudly and took off after us. We had started walking in the middle of this speech. I had already told her I was going to pick her up because I was sure he would go after her. She is only 5'2" if you want to know. As soon as she tapped me, I picked her up and set her on my shoulders. I felt the guy ram into me a second later. He was probably only 5'6" and didn't have any muscle on him from what I could see. He kind of bounced off and started yelling nonsense while following us. We made it to a worker who called the police and they took him away in handcuffs. The whole time this is happening, he's trying to punch me or grab her and is failing horribly. Funny thing is, I stayed with her the rest of the trip and walked her to her car. She gave me her number and now we're going to be married in a week. This happened 2 years ago and now she's going to be my wife.